The screech of tires shattered the evening calm as the sleek sedan swerved to block the aging Buick's path. Inside the Buick, 72-year-old Samuel Carter gripped the wheel, his knuckles whitening. He'd seen those flashing lights before, too many times, but tonight felt different. The two officers sauntered toward his car, smirking beneath the glow of the streetlights, their laughter sharp and careless. "Step out, old man," one barked, rapping his baton against the driver's window. Samuel's chest tightened, but his voice stayed steady, honed by decades of command. "Is there a problem, officers?" Behind him, the trunk held groceries, a folded American flag from his late wife's funeral, and a small black case he hadn't opened in years. They didn't care. What began as a routine stop spiraled fast. A taunt about his beat-up relic of a car, a racial slur muttered just loud enough. Then the first blow of the baton crashed into his taillight. Glass exploded. Samuel's heart pounded, not from fear but fury, and the crushing weight of a truth these men didn't know. A truth that could bury them. Meanwhile, across town, 17-year-old Jamal Thompson slumped in a bus seat, earbuds drowning out the world. His shift at the grocery store had run late again, and his calculus homework waited at home. When the pregnant woman boarded, clutching her swollen belly, he didn't hesitate. "Here," he said, standing too quickly, nearly tripping over his worn sneakers. The woman, pale, freckled, exhaustion lining her eyes, nodded thanks but avoided his gaze. Jamal turned back to the window, watching the city blur. He didn't see her studying him, the way her fingers trembled as she scribbled something on a napkin. When the bus lurched to her stop, she pressed the crumpled paper into his hand. "For you," she whispered. By the time Jamal unfolded it, she was gone. The words made his breath catch. "You're worth more." A phone number. And a name. Laura Bennett. Back on the deserted street, Samuel stood frozen as the officers trashed his car, their rage untethered. "Think you're somebody?" one sneered, kicking the dented door. Samuel's mind raced. That black case in the trunk, his naval dress uniform, his insignia, proof of the power he'd wielded as one of the highest-ranking black admirals in U.S. history. But revealing it now might escalate things further. Or it might destroy these men. His hand twitched toward the trunk release. Jamal stared at the note, the bus long empty. He dialed the number, pulse roaring in his ears. A voice answered on the first ring. "I've been waiting for this call," it said. The officers froze as Samuel's trunk creaked open. One of them lunged, grabbing his arm, then stopped cold. His partner's flashlight beam trembled over the gleaming gold stripes inside the case. "Admiral," the man breathed, the word collapsing into the night, and Jamal, clutching the napkin like a lifeline, whispered, "Who are you?" The line went dead. Neither story would end here. One man's legacy hung in the balance. One teen's future teetered on a stranger's secret, and somewhere, in the shadows between justice and cruelty, their worlds were about to collide. Flashlight clattered to the pavement as the younger officer stumbled back, his partner's grip on Samuel's arm going slack. The gold stripes on the Admiral's dress uniform glinted under the streetlight like a silent accusation. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the ragged breathing of three men, one furious, two terrified. "Admiral Carter," Samuel said quietly, the weight of his rank settling like a blade. "United States Navy, retired." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut. The older officer, his face drained of color, opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Samuel's mind flashed to a moonlit deck in the Persian Gulf decades ago, a younger version of himself barking orders as missiles streaked overhead. Back then, fear had been a tool. Tonight, it was a weapon. He reached into the trunk, his fingers brushing the cold metal of his service medal case. "You boys ever heard of Article 134? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. The younger cop flinched. Samuel didn't need to explain. They knew. Conduct. Unbecoming an officer. A charge that could end careers. But as he studied their trembling hands, the way their eyes darted to their dash cam, a darker truth clicked. This wasn't their first time. The practiced cruelty, the ease of the slur. Samuel's jaw tightened. How many others had there been? Across the city, Jamal stood frozen in the empty bus depot, the disconnected call echoing in his ear. The woman's, Laura Bennett's, had been crisp, educated, with a tremor he couldn't place. I've been waiting for this call. Like she knew him, like she'd been watching. His thumb hovered over redial, but the sound of approaching footsteps made him stuff the napkin into his pocket. His mom's second shift at the hospital wouldn't end for hours, but the last thing he needed was her finding out about this. Not after the trouble last year, when he'd been questioned for walking home too slowly past a gated community. The napkin burned against his thigh all night. At 3 a.m., crouched in the dim glow of his closet, the only place his little sister couldn't barge in, he Googled the name, Laura Bennett. The screen lit up with articles. Local philanthropist opens youth center. CEO steps down amid controversy. Her face stared back, pale auburn hair, the same exhausted eyes from the bus. But the woman in the photos wore power suits, not a maternity dress. Jamal's stomach twisted. Why would someone like her notice him? The note's words taunted him. You're worth more. Worth more than what? Than his crowded apartment? Then, the way teachers lowered their voices when they discussed his potential. He didn't sleep. By dawn, he'd redialed 7 times. Always straight to voicemail. A robotic female voice. No greeting. Back on the desolate street, the officer's bravado had dissolved into panicked whispers. We could say he resisted. The younger one began. Shut up, the older snapped, shooting a frantic look at Samuel. The Admiral stood motionless, arms crossed, watching them unravel. He'd seen this before, not in cops but in cocky ensigns who'd botched a maneuver. The moment they realized the ocean didn't care about their ego. Sir, the older officer choked out, there's been a misunderstanding. Samuel's laugh was cold. You destroyed my property, assaulted a decorated officer. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a felony. He let the words sink in, then leaned closer. But you're right about one thing, I am somebody, and I know exactly what you are. The younger officer's radio crackled to life. Unit 12, report status. All 3 men stared at it. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Well, report. Jamal's bus ride to school felt longer than usual. He kept scanning faces, half expecting Laura Bennett to materialize. Instead, a different woman boarded. Elderly, black, her arms full of grocery bags. Jamal stood instantly. She smiled, patting his hand. Bless you, child. Her touch lingered, her eyes suddenly sharp. You got a light in you. Don't let nobody blow it out. The words lodged in his chest, mingling with the notes, promise. At school, the hallways buzzed with gossip about some old dude standing up to corrupt cops. Jamal's friend Deshaun elbowed him. Yo, they say the guy's a war hero. You think it's true? Jamal shrugged, mind elsewhere. But when his history teacher played a documentary clip about racial integration in the military, his breath hitched. There, in grainy footage from the 90s, stood a younger Samuel Carter, shoulders straight, voice booming as he addressed Congress. Equality, the Admiral declared, isn't a policy, it's a practice. The screen froze. Ms. Wilkins gestured. Admiral Carter paved the way for thousands, retired now but still active in veteran advocacy. Jamal's hand crept to his phone, to the half-formed text he'd drafted to the mysterious number. Why me? He deleted it. As Samuel's story dominated the news cycle, Jamal's split-screen life grew more jarring. At work, stock boy by day, he restocked aisles while customers debated the Admiral's ordeal. He should have shown ID faster, muttered a man in a suit. Jamal's grip tightened on a soup can. That night, as he mopped floors, the store TV showed Samuel's press conference. The Admiral's voice steady but weary. This isn't about me. It's about every citizen who's been told they don't belong in their own country. The mop handle splintered in Jamal's hands. Unknown to both, threads began to weave. A deleted security tape from the bus depot. An anonymous tip to Internal Affairs about the officer's past. and in a sleek downtown office, Laura Bennett stared. At a wall of photos, Jamal volunteering at a food bank, Samuel cutting the ribbon at a community center, her finger tracing a red string between them. The bus depot's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets as Jamal approached the bench Laura had specified. His reflection in the tinted windows looked smaller than he felt. Hoodie drawn tight, fists jammed in pockets. She sat perfectly, still, her once freckled face now pale under layers of concealer, hands folded over a leather portfolio. No maternity bump, no warmth. "You came," she said, not smiling. Up close, her eyes held a brittleness the news photos had airbrushed. "Away, why'd you give me that note?" Jamal demanded, hovering just out of reach. Laura's gaze flickered to the security camera above them. "Because you're part of a story bigger than either of us," she said, sliding a manila envelope across the bench. Inside, Jamal found a faded newspaper clipping, local teen saves toddler from drowning, with a photo of a 14-year-old boy himself, dripping wet, clutching a crying child. He'd never told anyone about that day. "How did you—" "I've been tracking acts of courage," Laura cut in. "Quiet ones, the kind that don't trend online." Her voice faltered for the first time. "My husband, he was a reporter. He believed ordinary bravery could unravel even the most rotten systems. Then he tried to expose one." She didn't need to say more. The hollow in her tone said, "Dead." Jamal's throat tightened. This wasn't a mentorship. It was a handoff. "What's this got to do with that Admiral guy?" he asked. Laura stiffened. "Samuel Carter spoke at my husband's funeral. They served together, Navy intelligence. If anyone can expose what's happening, it's him. But he can't do it alone." She nodded to the envelope. "There's a flash drive. In there. Passcodes, encrypted files. He'll know what to do with them." Jamal recoiled. "Why not go to him yourself?" A shadow passed over Laura's face. "They're watching him, but they're not watching you, not yet." "They—" The word hung between them, venomous and vague. Across town, Samuel stared at the predated arrest report, the commissioner's office reeking of stale coffee and sweat. "This timestamp proves nothing," the commissioner drawled, not meeting his eyes. "Glitch in the system." Samuel leaned forward, palms flat on the mahogany desk. "I've sunk submarines with less evidence than this, son. You really want to test me?" The commissioner's phone rang, a shrill lifeline. He grabbed it. "What now? Fine." He stood abruptly. "We'll reconvene tomorrow." Samuel didn't move. "Who's pulling your strings?" The man paused at the door. "Retire again, Admiral, while you still can." That night, Samuel's apartment felt too quiet. He unfolded his dress uniform, the metals clinking like wind chimes. Beneath them lay a photo of his late wife, Marisol, laughing on a Havana beach, a honeymoon snapshot from a time when hope felt infinite. The doorbell rang. A teenager stood there, hoodie askew, holding an envelope like it might bite. "Laura Bennett sent me," Jamal blurted. Samuel's eyebrows rose. "Should I know her?" Her husband was Thomas Bennett. "You spoke at his funeral." The name hit like a depth charge. Thomas, the journalist who'd embedded on Samuel's ship years ago, who'd asked too many questions about off-the-books ops, who'd vanished 2 months after Marisol's cancer diagnosis. Samuel's hand trembled as he took the envelope. "Come in." Jamal hovered in the doorway. "She said you'd know what to do." The flash drive's files glowed on Samuel's laptop. Incident reports, officer names, bank transfers, a pattern, a net